Play It Forward, Tips and Tricks, E.B Kogan, and Jessica Silvetti. Thank you so much, filmmakers. How you been?
Good.
Good.
How's it going?
It's going well. Really good to see you both again. Thank you for being on the show.
Of
Best
course.
practices. We're going to start with pre-production, where it all begins. What are some of the like tried and true things that you guys do and can share?
Oh man. I mean, knowing knowing it sounds very simplistic, but knowing what you want to shoot. I mean, not everyone can pay for storyboards and, along those lines, but essentially do that work, even if you can't pay for it. Write it down, write what you would to a storyboard artist if you had one. Along those lines, work with your DP if you have a separate one to figure out what you want to shoot, or if you want to improvise, right? Oh, we want to improvise this, but something like this. But just being so prepared and knowing this is what we're going to do when we get to set that day.
Yeah, I think it's like having a very clear vision, but being able to communicate that. So whatever gets you there, if you are able to get a storyboard artist, or even if you yourself can like write little stick figures with camera angles
Yeah,
or
yeah.
have comparables, of like images from other movies or things that really show your vision.
Yeah.
That's super important. It's preparation, because I know we're not talking about production yet, but you're preparing for that. And when you
Right.
get to that, you're going to have limited time. So the more you can put into prep, the much more you can extend the time you
Yeah.
do have on set.
And it sounds boring and frustrating and not as like exciting as just getting there and figuring it out like you would if you're an actor improvising on set on the day. But it's just so important. It allows you to actually improvise, knowing what you're going to shoot, and then so many times what you want to shoot doesn't work, and so you have to improvise. But you're starting from a point, and that helps. And like Jessica said about drawing stick figures, if you can, anything you can. Like I've gotten good at Photoshop, so I can kind of like take pieces from other images and kind of fabricate storyboards in that regard. If that helps, do something like that as well to get your idea across to all the other people involved who are going to help you set up your shot that day.
I think you have to be so clear on what you would like, but also have flexibility if you need to pivot, and if you need to pivot, but you're still going to be true to what you want to get across and what you want to share for your story.
Yeah. Prepared but pivot. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's horrible. I can't. I was trying to make a t-shirt, but that doesn't work.
P squared.
P
It
P
works.
squared.
squared.
I like it because you know it's it's a moving target,
Yeah.
and there are a lot of variables, a lot of pieces, and visualizing that body of work, because that's what you're creating. There's a body of work bound by a certain time sequence, start in the middle,
Yeah.
um and visualizing each detailed progression of that, I think, addresses and helps that pivot, because you know what falls within and what doesn't. And preparing that vision and taking those steps that may not seem glamorous to us, but really are the backbone of creating the skeletal structure to this
Yeah.
body of work, is awesome. I think one of the things that's like how we do as directors our personal work in preparation, and then there's kind of that social aspect of directing where we are communicating with our lead teams, and particularly the DP and the acting team. How do you prepare in pre-production with those particular dynamics?
I think for me, for instance, with actors, it's making myself available. Like everybody has their own process. So I don't want to invade their space if they're very much about their keeping it to themselves until they show up on set. But I always like pre-shooting say, we don't have like the capacity or the time or money to be able to rehearse, at least being able to have conversations about the character or any questions, anything that's questions. So that way you can have that communication. And if it's an actor you haven't really worked with before, like starting to learn the way they like to speak, or the kind of, dialogue they like to have, and kind of, I think that's very helpful for, for when you get on set. With DPs, I think everybody works differently, but again, getting on the same page from the very beginning, right? Like, mainly if it's a project you've written and are directing, you might have a very, very set vision, but having that conversation with your DP, and also allowing to, it's a collaborative process, and don't be closed off to some amazing ideas. Yes, it's your baby, but it becomes a collaborative process. So you have to open up to all these different creatives who are bringing in their talent, and that's why you're working with them. So sharing, again, like comps from before, color palettes, just really like dig into a bunch of different things from the get-go.
Yeah, totally agree. You basically took all the right answers. So all I could add is, if you can rehearse with actors. I know some actors don't like to rehearse. They feel like it takes the magic out of it. And there is some merit to that at times. If not rehearsals, meetings, just to talk about theme with them, just to talk about how scenes might go. Just setting up relationships with other actors is always a good part. With DPs, you basically said everything. The most important thing that I think is, like you said, images, mood reels, if you can edit anything, or pitch decks, if you are good with drawing or Photoshop or anything. Because what that does is, case in point, on a project that I'm developing, I hired a comic book artist to do some concept art, right, for some images. And what that does is it gets people on the same page, like, oh, I literally now see what you're trying to go for. And then everybody can aim towards that on the same page, at least a jumping off point. It's not going to look like that. It might not, but it helps everyone focus. Oh, that's what you're going for. Because so many times you think, oh yeah, we're on the same page, but you're not really, because you're not looking at the same literal corporeal thing. Stuff like that helps so much.
Those are all great points. And, to summarize them, essentially, I hear, first, it starts with creating relationships, just reaching out to those people, creating relationships. Rehearsal is key if it's possible, and if it fits within the constructs that you're working with. And then creating a common language with the people that you're working with is huge. And part of the common language does come to, nailing things that are kind of ethereal images and ideas in our heads to getting them as concrete as possible. Those are great tips, guys. And key. And it's interesting, the more I do this tips and tricks, the more you hear the theme. This is an animal, and the way it progresses is there are these key, factors that have to be put in place. And now we've done all that. We're in production, day 1, day 20, pick a day. But what are the best practices, and how do you approach it? And now what are we doing?
I mean, it's tough because like you said, it is an animal, and everybody's going to be different on set. Everyone's going to have a different tactic, and different tactics lead to different outcomes. Depends on what you want. So the way I see it, at least from a director standpoint, unless you're also the DP, or unless you're the sound guy, which happens a lot on low budget stuff, you're kind of the parent on set, meaning that there's all these other departments running around doing a lot of hard work. You've done your work with them in pre-production. You kind of are there to answer questions and make sure the vision is going, but you're not the one lifting or setting the lights and whatnot. You and the actors have a lot of time together. That's why a lot of directors and actors get really close, because on set, you're kind of waiting for the DP setup, the gaffer to get the lights going, the grips moving around. Also, that is if you have more of a crew, but it works scaled down or scaled up. I think patience and communication, making sure everybody knows what the next shot is. It's very similar to pre-production, making sure everyone's on the same page still. and making sure you keep everyone focused. I don't know if you've heard like some bigger directors like Christopher Nolan doesn't allow chairs on the set, or Tarantino doesn't, allow cell phones, things like that.
Um, yeah, I agree. Patience is super important. I think this is similar to what Ethan's saying. I a lot of the time I talk about like, you know, a director, like you set the tone, right? It's like if you are the captain of a ship and if your ship is going down, you still have to be like cool and collected. And if you're running around freaking out, everyone's gonna be like, we're sinking, So I think it's really important to keep that level head, to clearly communicate, and always be respectful of everyone. Always definitely, just communicate, and with your heads of department, really, like sometimes you have to make tough decisions of things these scenes you really wanted to shoot, or these shots you wanted to get, and you just don't have time, and you have to like kill it, unfortunately. But you have to make those decisions sometimes, and sometimes it's definitely just on you, but don't be afraid to talk with your DP and figure out like, okay, like, is there any way, here's the thing again, to pivot, to like, or like sometimes two shots can combine into one, like just be open to that, mainly because sometimes you're really under the wire, and it's hard to to let go of some of those ideas you had that you're like so excited about, but figure out, like, take it as an opportunity to like condense it, or choose what you really need when you're having a tough time with how much time you have.
Those are like two of what you both said, the most important things to do, and with experience we get there. And I think the question for any filmmaker at any level of experience is, well, how do you put that into practice, right? One concept of doing that helps me, and people have talked about, is kind of borrowed from business leadership thinking, and they call it the servant leader in software development. And so there's this idea of a parent. What is a parent, right? And we all have our own, models of that in our head. But the way you described it, Ethan, EB, is, I think, really sensitive. It's a parent who's a leader and is able to guide people through their difficult, whether they're emotions or frustrations, because you have all these people trying to do something together, and everybody has, something that may be more difficult to the other person if they do it their way and this way. And so you're really, oftentimes it could feel like you're herding cats. You have your own personal vision, and there's personalities. And very much to what you're saying, Jessica, there's compromise. There's always these moments of compromise that you have to work through and maintain your own level of integrity and clarity in the process. And so I guess what helps you guys do that in the fire heat of battle, if I can use that?
I mean, one, reflecting on past experiences and how I messed up. Honestly, short answer, messing up. That's what helped me.
Yeah.
Literally, it sounds so stupid, but like just being bad at something and having done it and falling on my face.
Oh God.
But it sounds so simplistic after you've done it. But before, it's like, why the hell would I do that? No, I'm too good. Or no, I'm better than that. I'm going to do good this time. Yeah, it's as simple as like actually doing something and then finishing it, and then looking back and be like, oh, I could have done that better, or oh, that was stupid because then that led to this. Like little things. It's not like a big, huge nuclear explosion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Constant reflection.
Yeah. And I got so like caught visualizing what you were saying. No, like reflecting back on practicing, and nowadays, it's hard. It is expensive, and a lot of indie filmmaking, you have to like budget it yourself or crowdfund or however you get there. But I do think the more you do, and everyone says this, but it's true, the more you will have those opportunities to fail in a smaller in a smaller production or something, so you learn. And obviously nobody wants to fail, but sometimes you might make magic out of things that you're like, I don't have this thing, like just like the necessity of something, your creation, your creativeness can like open up further. But those things do make you stronger, smarter, more resilient, and all you can do is like keep going, and you'll just become better.
I mean, here's a specific, simplistic lesson. When you're younger or starting out and making films, it sounds so obvious, but you really only have a limited number of favors you can call in when you're making films, because like, oh, I want you to do this for like free to little pay, or you to do this for free to little pay.
Always feed people though.
Yeah, always. That's another lesson. But like, you do that one project and like all these people come in for free and work their asses off and everything. You can't do that again. Or at least with the same people, or because as you get older, the people you work with get older and gain more experience and have worked for more money, and they're not going to go back and do that. And like you said, this is all relationships. If you want those freebies again, you got to start forging new relationships and work with younger, inexperienced people. And that's not necessarily moving forward with you. Just something to think about.
I love that, Ethan, because I really, really respect what you've just opened up. It's a new door that, I think is super critical. And I wish I could it's really the mechanics of creating independent film. And I don't think there's enough discussion about that around how do we collaborate and how do we work free. And, sound guys can move up quicker than a director could. So sound guys are like gone the next day because they have a tangible product. Here's a sound. I stood here for, 3 hours and I know what I'm doing and I delivered a file for you. And whereas directors, there's more competition, there's more, so you have to it's harder to navigate the landscape. So, each of us has their own personal story about how they've gotten to where they've gotten, as long as you stay in the business, right? Because you can work with what, people are moving around, not necessarily, half the people you work with, they're doing something else. They're not still filmmaking, 10 years later. And I think it's so important. And there's just, that could be like a whole nother discussion that, maybe we'll have, Ethan, if you're open to it. Because it's such an honest one, and I think one of the mistakes that I did, I'll just come out of the closet, is I partnered up with somebody who I loved. We were friends, a great relationship, many years. The relationship soured. We were creative partners. We launched a company together. And it's a rich experience, but the kernel of that relationship came from I needed him and he needed me. And we were both using one another. And the relation couldn't sustain. It didn't have longevity. At some point, even though we did some great work together, So how do you get to a place, and learning from that experience for myself? It's just like, you just got to be honest. Like, here's where we are. And if you want to be a part of this, is what we're doing. If not, it's cool too. And I think I was so green at one point. I didn't come from a film school background. I was just like desperate to work with people. And I was just like willing to, take whoever would be available to some extent, or who I thought knew more than me. And it just wasn't a match on a more kind of creative, spiritual, just like, hey, we're, are we going to create this thing together? We're not necessarily, yes, we want to progress our careers. Maybe this will take us to the next level. We'll be getting paid and we'll have, some sort of, but it can't start there. There has to be some creative integrity, in my opinion, to what it is you're doing. And
but you don't always know that that's gonna be there. You think it might be, you talk with someone, but you only know once you start working.
Yeah, once you collaborate, then you'll figure it out.
So
And
you're
Yes.
always taking a risk.
and that's part of it. And then the people that, the people that you start with, that you do have that like spark with, you're going to continue with, whether it's like, there are some people that, you could still call a favor, but like you're on the same page
Sure.
and you're working on something together that you were thinking, maybe it's a short that's going to go to a feature. Maybe like there's something in there that it's something in return still. And it's, you mentioned about like using each other, but in this sense, it's like supporting each other. You're like, oh, you're a DP who wants this, and I'm a director who wants this. Let's, keep supporting each other in this way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think supporting each other, that's the relationship you're looking for.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
sometimes
Yes.
you're confronted with the relationship where, you're both using each other and then that fizzles out and
Yeah.
it just doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it works on all levels too. Why do you think you see like DiCaprio and Scorsese making every single movie
Right.
together?
Right.
Because
Exactly.
once you get that relationship,
Yeah.
you're like, no, keep
Yeah.
working with me on everything.
Yes.
Or with
Yes.
certain actors,
Yes.
like you're just gonna, you hope that that's what you find.
Yes.
Because it really is hard to find that like-minded. Like we have a DP that we work with regularly, and we're always asking, them for projects because we gelled so well
Mhm.
and they're so good.
Yeah.
And, you try to keep
Yeah.
that.
And we also worked on like when we started, so you build that relationship of going like when you're basically like a skeleton crew. So you're kind of, you went through that rough patch, and we survived together and learned together and grew together. And those are the relationships you really hope for.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the only thing I'd like to add, which I'm sure you both experience, is that there's just a joy of creativity in that collaboration that ultimately happens. And it's just like, that's the payoff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, because if you have this idea in your head, but then this other person comes, they're like, oh, it'll make that better. And you're like, oh, that is better.
Yeah.
And the communication, you almost like build a shorthand, like, or like, you're behind the camera, you're however you like to direct, if you're behind Video Village or more hands-on, but it's just like a look, like you don't even have to say, and you exchange a look with your DP and do like a signal, and you're like, yes, it's like unspoken, and that's pretty
and that also
incredible.
comes from pre-production.
Yes.
Where
exactly.
you already know what you want, and so you can just have that.
You're clear. You're like, it's like you're on the same page for sure, and like, that will help so much. Like
you're looking like that's not working, and the DP is thinking, oh, they don't like that, like because they just know.
Yeah,
it's part of the magic. It's part of the magic. Guys, moving on, just by nature of time, to post-production. We got a pile of footage, we got some notes, and I know I have felt the just burden of getting over the hump to that first edit, and going through it and just not having a clue where to start. So please help me. Like, what do you do?
So, okay. And not everyone can do this, but there's a reason why on most professional productions, the editor starts almost like the day of or the day after shooting starts. They're working in tandem while you're shooting. One, it sets up a timeline to work efficiently, and time is money. So, investors want it done sooner, but it does help to push it along. So if an editor can start while you're shooting, it also gives you a look, because people don't screen dailies anymore. We're not working with film. It's almost kind of like a backup for, somebody's there looking at the footage, putting it together while we're shooting to make sure that things are cohesive.
And organizing the footage.
Yeah. And if it doesn't work, hopefully you have enough communication with your editor where you can call and be like, hey, you don't have any shots of this. It looks really weird. I can send you a clip. Maybe if you have time, get an insert shot or redo this shot, or, to keep talking extremely helpful. Again, it's not always viable
Yeah.
from a financial standpoint, depending on what level you're at, but there's a reason why people do that and why productions do
It's
that.
a great point.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess if you're not, at that level, you can't afford that, then at least, we're lucky with the relationship we have with each other, and like, pretty much edit our own work. So it's different, but at the same time, if you maybe can't do that, maybe start having your editor in the conversation from the beginning and
Yeah.
invite them on set if they can,
If they can.
or share like your shot list, share certain things. Mainly if you're newer, as you do it more, you'll yourself be able to see like, will this cut together? But an editor can also give you that perspective. And if you
Yeah.
have certain shots missing, like if your editor is not available, obviously to come to production, share that with them. And
Yeah.
they might be able to, mainly if you're starting out, give you some ideas of like, oh, you might be missing this thing, or think about your transitions, think about those things, that how something will really cut together. Like start thinking about that too.
I mean, I have very strong opinions on this because, well, my day job is as an editor. So and that's another conversation. People don't talk enough about day jobs and side jobs while you're filmmaking,
You're
because
absolutely
everyone does
right.
it and nobody
right.
wants to talk about it.
Yep.
Anyway.
We're going to follow up on this if that's cool.
But think of an editor is such a huge creative force in your movie, and they do not get enough credit at any level. They really don't.
Yep.
Hell, even the Oscars were basically editing them out of the live broadcast as if they're just a.
It's crazy.
Yes, it is,
because they're responsible for the pacing of your movie.
An edit can make or break your film.
Yeah,
an
performance. Like it's super important.
Everything.
Like that's part of your creative team too. You need to have that communication, that discussion with your editor too. Like,
so if you don't have enough money to bring them on, or if you are the editor, or if someone's going to just do it later, think of it like a VFX supervisor on bigger stuff. You sometimes bring on a VFX supervisor who's not doing the VFX work, but it's looking at the stuff, be like, oh, that might mess up the VFX work you want. You might want to shift that, or you might want to do that. An editor can help with the same opinions, not to help you, not to screw you up and redo your shots, but just give an opinion like that might not cut together well, just so you know. Things like that, just to some sort of insight.
Mainly if you don't have a lot of footage, like if you are, I feel like we're giving both perspectives, like bigger budget, smaller budget, but like you don't have access to these things, but like if you can at least have that conversation, because time is money, right? But even in a production that you're shooting for 2 days, if you're running out of time, if you have that in mind, you could figure out, because if you don't have something to cut together well, you're going to suffer, in post, and then your vision will suffer too.
Or if you do your pre-production work and you have some sense of a storyboard or something, and talk to an editor to be like, this is what I'm thinking. Do you see any major issues with this?
Yeah. And again, it's not for them to like take over in anything, but again, it's that collaborative process, because you're building something. And obviously, from the page to production to the edit, it's like three different beasts. So
and I just intuitively, it feels right. If you can afford to have that editor, or the editor can afford to be there, then it's just, they have their vision that's starting to grow and build and, coalesce together.
Yeah. And I always say editing is basically your last rewrite of the script, because you need an editor that knows pacing, that kind of is essentially a writer in some respects. So take that into mind when you're trying to figure out who to work with.
Yeah. Don't think like the whole thing, fix it in post. Like don't try to lean into that. Don't, that's just like procrastinating for like the big issues. Like, like try to prep a lot, try to do all you can in production. And then, hopefully, in post you can fix the things you couldn't, but don't just depend on that.
Right.
You guys, that's great advice. It's really, really words of wisdom, hard won experience. Jessica Silvetti, E.B Kogan, thank you so much for being on the show. Filmmakers, a pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, till next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.